Welcome to the first episode of Boomer Bust of the 2025 NFL draft season. I'm your host, Terry, and today, talking just in general about the NFL draft and my process and everything. For those who have been around for a while, you probably heard me do something similar each year. And for those new, that's why I do this, so you could just kind of get an idea of what it is I do. And I just figured I'd go through the process and along the way, hopefully just touch on some different points and things that I, find important. This is my 20th draft, so very excited for that. Obviously things have changed over the years, as they should, and just a lot of lessons, as I said before. Especially when it comes to the draft, the biggest difference between someone like me or whoever that does this type of work and the casual person isn't always the expertise and evaluation. It's the lessons learned. That's the biggest. Even if you aren't the best evaluator, just being able to see things be right and wrong, not just from your perspective, but other people's perspective and thought process, and have years and years of that data. It just makes you if you pay attention to it, it just makes you a better evaluator, and it helps you understand what's important. So I think that's the biggest thing that I could probably bring to the conversation for sure. Anyway, excuse me. At this point of recording, I've tried like 18 different times to record this. I originally was supposed to record it while I was in New Orleans, and that just did not work out during Super Bowl week. But either way, we're here now finally. And yesterday, I finished the offense. And right after this, I'll be diving in on the interior defensive line, getting started on the defensive side of the ball. Which puts me at a pretty good pace. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, about pace and all that, and kind of what that all looks like. But I feel like I'm in a good spot, especially with 2 more weeks in the month. So that's pretty good. So for me, things have changed over the years, but typically what I'll do, I'm not a college football fan. That's not my thing. Never really was. And so I don't really get into the college football until right around January, when the playoffs are done. Now, a couple different factors that have changed that. The playoffs have extended this year, obviously, so there's more time and just more games, because usually I'll try to check out the playoff games, because usually it was the teams that put out some of the most prospects. But now we got a lot more playoff games, and it was the first year, so I watched more of that. The NCAA game came out, believe it or not. That was for sure impact. And I never even paid attention. Well, I guess back then they didn't have the names and stuff. But I really never paid attention to that. But this year, with the actual names and stuff, it was like, okay, this player, like, names, like, when I saw people, I kind of recognized them from the game. So that added a little bit of awareness. And then sports betting with more playoffs and all that. Definitely was betting on things more this year, but that doesn't give you everything, but I feel like I had a little more insight. Anyway, what I typically try to do is wait to after the playoffs, the championship, I should say, because that's when the deadline to declare for the draft usually is somewhere after that. Now, with the extended playoffs, the people that were in the later rounds got an extension, and everybody else, I still think they pushed the date back, but it used to be like second, third week of January. And then once that was done, that's when the process began. Before that, if I had time, I would start collect like the big names, like the for sure like first round picks, top 20, whatever you want to call them. And I just watch because that is supposedly the top end caliber of the draft. And then I watch to see what type of draft we got. In general, like, do we got some, elite type talent, or are the best guys just okay? Because every draft is different. Then once the list came out of who declared, then I would go into the stuff. This year is different, and again, because of the playoffs, what I did is, because the playoffs were so long, I used that extra time to compile a list of top 100 players, or at least I should say by position, I'll pull the players that are in the top 100. And that's different than what I used to do, but for the most part, that's what I try to do. Like, I always said, I want guys that are fringe first or third round picks. To me, if I can get the majority of guys that are in that range, then I feel pretty good about the draft. I don't have the time. I don't get paid for this, so I'm not 1,000 prospects deep. I don't know every person that's going to be in the 7th round. That's just not that's not the exercise that I'm allowed to do, and never been allowed to do, because I ain't never had that type of time. If I was a scout for a team or whatever, obviously I'd be able to do that. But yeah, so what I've settled on is top 100 guys, and knowing that, again, you're going to have fringe guys. So some guys, even if they ranked in the top 100, probably will still go 4th or 5th round, some a little later. And then also you're going to add to that list after the combine as well, because then you'll have names that pop up. So I try to stick to each position who are top 100. This year I did a triangulation where I used 3 different data sources and just kind of, and I need to do better next year writing down my color scheme, but essentially I use a color scheme, kind of like a thematic scheme that you might do in research. So the guys, I broke it down between guys that were like what I say stamped. That's the some of the lingo these days. These guys are stamped. These guys are like legit, no question, top 10 to 20 picks, whatever. I try to stick to top 10 guys that there's no question, like a Cam Ward, a Shedeur Sanders. There's no question I'm watching them. Abdul Carter, stuff like that. So I had that. Then I had top 50 guys, and then I had top 100 guys, and then I just went through the 3 different sources and kind of color coded. So at the end, you seeing guys that on all 3 levels, they were top 50. You got some guys that were top 50 on 2 sources, but might have been top 100 on 1 source, or a guy that was top 50 in 2 sources, but top 10 in another source, stuff like that. And so that gave me a pretty good guide. It actually worked out pretty well, because what I did is, as I get either in the crunch time or whatever, I can go back and see who were priority guys. So that worked pretty well. And then I just build out the little templates. Took a long time to do that, but it's well worth it to do it at the beginning. So now I could just, move on to the next player and keep it going. And I cut out a lot of stuff, man. Again, it's always process elimination of what really matters, what doesn't. Back in the day, it was just pretty straightforward. Actually, it looked more like it does now. But over the years, I added, just different stuff, like where the guy went, or like where they grew up, where they're from. Then I started dabbling in different stats for different positions. And what I just learned over the course, like, it's cool information to be like, hey, this guy went to the Bears and he's from Illinois, but it doesn't really matter. It doesn't impact a whole lot. And so this year took that out. That's extra time. That's less time I got to find looking for that stuff. Stats overall in general. Actually, I think there might be one stat that I kept, but other than that, I pulled the stats out of all the positions this year because I looked over the last few years and it doesn't really matter. And that's how I felt before. I wouldn't even say it has no impact, but it's not a big impact. Like your college stats is not a crazy impact. I still label awards like All-Americans, Biletnikoff, like all those different things, just so you know. But honestly, and I might do this one day if I just got some free time, but I really would love to do just a data research project and crosswalk all pros and pro bowlers and college accolades. And like really, you know, again, just kind of crosswalk. Here's all these players and probably do it by position. How many of these all Pro Bowl quarterbacks won a Heisman or Davey O'Brien trophy, whatever, stuff like that. And you could even probably do it with stats. I did that really quickly one time, might have been last year, and this is what convinced me to take the stats out. I was just curious. I was like, I wonder, like, because I was on this site with like the NCAA stats, and I was like, I wonder. I was thinking about Levante David because I remember watching him in Nebraska, monster. He was a monster in the league. He should be a Hall of Famer. But I remember thinking like, man, he racked up tackles in college and he racked up tackles in NFL. I wonder if that's like a fair assessment. And so I looked at like the league or the NCAA all-time leaders in tackles and stuff. And I'm telling you, like in the top 10, guys you never heard of. Guys you never heard of in the league. And again, that's a small sample, but my hypothesis is if you walk it across different stats and accolades, you know, I don't know that All-Americans and Heisman's equals All-Pro. I don't know that, you know, whatever. The one thing that I kept two stats. I kept starts for offensive linemen, time on task, and I might have starts for quarterbacks too. Like quarterback starts is kind of one of those things that's always been talked about. Big Bill Parcells thing. I got on board with that. Not to say I'm not one of these people where it's a hard stance on anything. Like you have to have this to get drafted. I never do that really with any player, any position. But I think it does help to let you know what kind of time on task this person has. And same thing with the offensive line. Now, one thing that's tricky about that nowadays is the transfer portal. So you got a guy like Cam Ward who has like 40 plus starts, but he only had one season at Miami. And I didn't really go into the past. Like, I know he went to Washington State, which is, you know, not terrible. But at the same time, you got to say he had 1 year of big-time football on the big stage. And again, I didn't look at his old stats, but he had 1 year of this caliber of football. And so, yeah, you got all these starts, but it doesn't exactly mean the same thing. So, you know, that's something that me and evaluators are going to have to figure out as we go. What does that mean? Does it mean a whole lot? Obviously, I think playing in a different number of schemes and all that always matters, whether you're at the same school or not. But with the transfer portal, man, it does make it a little tricky. So those are things that I do make sure to note. Because I want to know, and I've done that in the past. I want to know if a player played at a different school. It tells you a little bit something about him. And again, from my advantage, it doesn't mean a whole lot for what I'm doing. I don't have a team. Like if I'm on a team, then I know the player profile we're looking for. I know what the GMs and the coaches feel about guys that transfer a lot, or what do you feel about a guy that had this amount of starts, or what do you feel about a guy that gave up because he wasn't starting? Like, but for me sitting here, it doesn't matter that whole bunch. I just kind of want to know where these people played at, because it's changing now. But you used to have, you know, institutions, programs knowing like, oh, okay, if he spent 2 years with Saban, I need to know that because that gives me some type of idea of what he was exposed to. But now, you know, it's changing. So I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, so I build those templates out and then I get to work. I got my list or I guess like my order, there you go, of how I go. And it's always offensive tackle, interior line, quarterback, receiver, tight end. Used to be running back after quarterback, but I don't grade running backs anymore. So, and then from there, interior D-line, edge, off-ball linebacker, corner, then safety. So that's how we get down. And so, yeah, I just jump into it, and each position has their, I guess, gradable attributes, I would say. And it's different, again, like I said, for each position. So that's kind of what I haven't really changed those in a lot. And so there's qualitative grades and there's quantitative. So for example, with the offensive line, it's always pass blocking, run blocking, motor. And it's all the grades are always out of 5 being the highest. And so I usually go by halves. So 0, I've never done a 0 or 0.5 to be honest, but like 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, so on and so forth. And so that's how I kind of grade that. And then there are more qualitative things. So like for a tackle, it'll be like a level 5 pass blocking. And then I'll also have things like hand placement. And that's where I use qualitative language. So it's usually poor, below average, average, above average, good, very good, great, excellent, elite. And I probably could get rid of very good. I don't know, maybe. I don't know. To me, there's a difference between very good and great. And I'm very stickler with words. Any evaluation, I'm kind of a stickler for those things. And so that's why I make sure I have enough descriptors so that I'm being accurate. Because great to me means something much more than very good. And so, but anyway, that's how that kind of goes. And yeah, and then we evaluate from there. And each position has its own little nuance, its own little pain points. But I go through, I evaluate in the first round, where pretty much I try to get the list that I have and get everybody done. This time around, be honest with you, especially because I felt a little bit behind, some of those guys that are fringe top 100, I skipped over in certain parts, but I do plan on getting them in the second round. So first round happens before the combine if everything goes well. And then after the combine, that's when I update certain positions, for the most part, the skill positions. Pretty much all the skill positions. I upgrade the skill positions in terms of speed and all those different things. Because for some players it's harder to judge, and then to be honest, some players just run faster on the track than they do on the field, and that's why we get people who jump up in popularity even though they might not warrant it, but whatever. So after the combine, like I said, we usually have some combine darlings. Not only people, I get why you think this, and it's partly true, but it's not only because of the numbers. That happens for sure, but because you got all these NFL people in the same city, that now the insiders, the writers, and even other NFL people kind of are hearing what other people are thinking. And so they're shifting their boards around, or they're like, hey, I got to go back and look at this guy because, I don't know, the D-line coaches are going crazy over this guy. That's what I'm hearing from the GMs. And so that happens a lot too. So you usually pick up some combine darlings, some guys that people want to go back and reevaluate. And so that happens. And round 2, which is after the combine, I'll pick up those new guys and give them an evaluation, a fresh evaluation for the most part. The second guys, the guys that I'm doing a second evaluation on, I usually just watch a little bit look at my notes, see if I'm still seeing that on the screen. There are times, and I think every evaluator has their positions of weakness. So it might be certain positions. It might just be a certain player. There's some times where I watch the film and I'm like, whoa, what was I talking about? Now, I'm human. Everybody's human. That's part of the issue. You got human error. Especially when you watch a lot in a row, you get like this hypnosis and you might be a little, on cruise control, or you might be tired when you watch that person. You didn't give them a full vow. Either way, sometimes you look at it and you watch film and you're like, I was way off. And so sometimes that happens, but a lot of times you confirm kind of what you saw. And for the most part, I'll try to give them a grade. Or what I do is, let me pull it up and make sure I'm 100% on this. What I try to do is I'll give them a grade, like 5 out of 5 as a prospect. So 5-star, not 5-star, but yeah, actually that's why it's called. So 5-star prospect, 4.5-star, blah, blah, blah. And then I give it a best fit. And that can get very descriptive. It depends on the position. I feel like I was a lot more descriptive back in the day. At one point it was just a team, and now it's more like, here's a few teams, but this is the type of scheme, this type of coach, or this type of supporting cast. And again, it's different for each position. Quarterbacks probably had the most description, where it's like, this guy needs like 2 receivers that are good at 50-50 jump balls, like stuff like that. And then I do scheme dependency. One of my big foundational philosophies, only like 1% of the players in the league transcend the scheme. Most players are scheme dependent. And so, but it's different levels to it. And you get guys, because, and that's part of it, that I could talk about forever. You got a lot of guys that can be productive or whatever, depending on their situation. And most of the time when people talk about players, especially like the top end players, they talk about them in a vacuum. This guy sucks, this guy's great, this guy's elite, this guy's horrible, whatever. And it matters 99% of the time. It matters what they're surrounded in, what they're being asked to do. So I try to grade the level of scheme dependency. You got some guys that are a level 5. They like, the scheme is going to be everything for them. They only fit in one particular role. And then you got guys that you got guys that are level 1 or 2, where it's like, yeah, they're pretty much going to be good in anything you put them in. So that's kind of how I break it down. So I try to fill that out after round 2. But then right before the draft, if you want to call it round 3, that's when I like do my official, like, okay, here's the prospect and here's the label. So I usually try to give people labels. Well, not everybody has a label. If you get a label, you get a label. And by labels, I'm talking boomer bust pick, sleeper pick, a flyer, a gem, stuff like that. And so, or medical risk, red flag, whatever. So that's it. And then once we get to the draft, by that time, I usually average out. What do I do? Oh, I think I'm trying to remember how I do this. But I do the position grades. So, oh yeah, that's what I do. All right, so for each position, I'll grade the top talent and the depth of the position, and the same thing out of 5 with the halves. So, for example, like I might say quarterback, the top talent is 2.5, but the depth is 3.5. So I add that up, average it, and I give it a grade. So 2.5, 3.5, that'd be a D. I'm just looking at one of the last ones I did. And so that way at each position group, I have kind of the grades, so I know kind of, what type of group we got that year. And I'll do some rankings potentially. I don't do mock drafts. I I say mock drafts are useless, and I agree, but I need to clarify that as I think about it this year. And again, just being able to be exposed to more stuff around the league these last few years. I understand simulations, especially mock drafts, as like scenario planning. And obviously with AI, you could do a bunch of, random scenarios, thousands within a second. Yes, those are useful. The NFL, they do those things. They do those exercises. Obviously, they're not the end all be all, but it just gets them prepared. The difference is they're working off one team. People that in the writing business that are doing mock drafts, this isn't let's plan. What if this happens? This is what we're going to do. No, you're doing it for every single team. And not only are you doing it for every single team, you're mocking either what you heard or you're mocking what you want to do, whatever. And that needs to be intentional. The NFL is very intentionally doing mock drafts, as in, here's what we're hearing, what likely these teams might do and who might be available. Not the mock draft where it's, hey, I'm just trying to put all these puzzle pieces together, or this is what I like. Those are useless. And so, at least so far, Mel Kiper and Phil Yates, I watch First Draft all the time. I watched them back in the day. Listen to the podcast, all that stuff. Those are some of the OGs, and Mike Mayock as well. But at least this year with First Draft, they're being very specific that their mocks are based on intel they're hearing from people. So I'm sure it's going to shake up real crazy after the combine, because then they'll get more information. But that somewhat useful. I use it so far right now too. Like, I grade a guy. I'm like, okay, this is where I got him. Where are they putting him in the mocks? And so, but for the most part, they're useless. I don't do mock drafts because I don't got no intel, so ain't no reason for me to do mock drafts. But I will do some rankings sometimes. So that's pretty much it. That's pretty much the process, man. And you got to know what you're doing it for. Similar to the mock draft, you got to understand what your end goal is. For me, it's very simple. At one point, I said I want to be able to know at least 9 times out of 10, any given player, I want to be able to know who that player is. Not only like where they went to school, but I want to know something about them. And I reached that level, and it's a little different now. As life changed, I haven't been as in depth as I used to be. And I'll never be as in depth as many players get drafted. So here and there, but for the most part, a good chunk of the players, like, to me, my success was always like, okay, once they pull up the starting lineup on the game, like, I know most of them, and I've been good with that. And over the years, also, I've added to it. Yeah, you want to, I wouldn't say be right, like, because that's what happens in the media where they're like rooting for somebody just because they want to be right about them. I want my evaluations to be accurate, and that way I can predict each year. And like I said, I think I've gotten better and better every year. This is my 20th draft, and so I think it shows, man. I think my eyes pretty trained on what I'm looking at. But yeah, I mean, as far as some of the takeaways, the biggest thing I say, like, I think the offensive side this year went pretty quick, number one, because there's not a ton of quarterbacks, especially in the top 100. It's really only Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. More than likely, Jackson Dart is going to jump into that. I'm starting to hear different names now that the Senior Bowl was over. But for the most part, top 100 is not a lot of guys. I added guys in there that people weren't really saying. So the list I have is small, and honestly, it's probably smaller than what I made it. And I didn't watch all those guys because I got to a point I'm like, okay, these guys are off the radar to a certain extent. We know who they are, but they probably off the radar draft-wise. I'll catch them in round 2. That plus the O-line position is not super big this year. I mean, tackles specifically, most of the top tackles are potential guards, so that already tells you something. And then the interior line wasn't huge. Now, that's one area where there's always smaller time prospects, not just school, but like in general, where they can end up being starters and stuff. So that stuff, I wouldn't say I miss that stuff, but I miss those evaluations all the time. Miss the evaluation means I got it wrong. I don't get to evaluate those players all the time. You get guys that pop up in a starting role by the beginning of the season. You're like, I didn't even know this guy. So that happens a lot. But again, I stick to the top 100. The top 100 doesn't have a lot of O-line. And O-line typically takes the longest to evaluate. And so because both of those groups were shorter, or smaller, I should say, I think that made it go by quickly. And then I don't do running backs. I've said this before, but people that are new, I stopped evaluating running backs because it just was no point. And I will honestly say this, I've felt that way about tight ends this year, where the tight end evaluations were just really quick. And I'm not complaining about that because there's a really good tight end group this year, but still, I'm like, these evaluations are almost lightning fast for me. Because here's the thing. When it comes to running back, it's not a tech. I don't even know if any besides the quarterback is technique driven. But running back is probably the least technique driven. And so it is very much athletic skills based and where you go. And I've said this for the longest time. Other people have said it too. That's part of the devaluation of the position, not the run game. If you're listening to this, I'm gonna tell you now, be smart, be a smart football person. The run game hasn't been devalued. The run game hasn't even fell off. It's just the position itself, the bell cow. They're not putting a lot of stock into that. Obviously this year people are talking about that changing, but I think it's pretty much the same. Anyway, with running backs, if you go to the right spot, you can be effective. And so you still get some people that will argue against that, but the proof is in the pudding, man. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. What matters the most for a running back's career is the offensive line that they're playing with. It is what it is. So you think about a Jamar Gibbs, not taking anything away from him. Great talent. But do you think he would have the same career up to this point with the Giants? Even looking at the Giants, Saquon, look what he did when he went to the Eagles and upgraded. We know Saquon is talented, and those are top tier backs. But even them, when you go with an offensive line of a high caliber, that's going to enhance and give you opportunities to do more. It is what it is. And so, like I said before, you look at the Eagles with what's that guy's name? Swift, DeAndre Swift, who played for my Bears. Okay, guy. With the Eagles, productive, put up numbers. Miles Sanders, okay with the Panthers. With the Eagles, put up numbers. They kept moving these people. Gainwell put up numbers last year in a spot role. Like, they keep rotating these guys, and they produce. Why? Because they have a great O-line. And so that, to me, is the biggest thing, and it's been the biggest thing. And it's no knock to them, but hey, if you have the requisite athletic skill, you can go behind these offensive line and be productive. And so for me, it was no reason to spend all this time trying to delineate between the different running backs, when at the end of the day, it's like, okay, where you get drafted is really the only question I need to know. Like, you're an NFL caliber athlete, more than likely. You go to a spot where if you get the starting spot or you get carries behind this O-line, you should be able to do some work. And so that's kind of why I stopped doing running backs. Like, I always called it dime a dozen, because you could get running backs anywhere, but ultimately it's just like, what does it take to be successful? Now, you still got pluses. You could be, again, we're talking about an average NFL athlete, not an average guy on the street. An average NFL athlete, running back, you could be productive. Now, you get guys with plus speed, plus explosion, plus route running or catching, plus pass pro, whatever it might be. Those different things make you more versatile, or they might make you better than just a productive running back. And so then that's when you get guys like a Saquon. That's when you get guys like a Gibbs and top running backs, a Derrick Henry. And so you're like, okay, those guys are clearly on a different caliber, but the rules still apply to them as well. Their offensive line is going to open up the ceiling for their success. Football is very interdependent, and it applies to a lot of positions, but running back especially. In that same philosophy, I started to feel that with tight ends. And this is some just receiving in general, which I've talked about receivers being dime a dozen too, because availability. You could get guys that could become all pros in the middle rounds and all those different things. The reason receiving is different to me than running backs, because it is more skill driven, where I'm not saying running backs don't have any skill, but like route running and different things of that nature require a little bit more skill. And so they're worth looking at the film. But at the end of the day, they're just different flavors of, player too. In the NFL, today's NFL, there's schemes that need all those different guys. But for tight ends specifically, you are a walk-in mismatch. You walk on the field and you're already a mismatch. So again, if you're an average NFL athlete and you're 6'4" taller, 240 or heavier, you can be a productive, I wouldn't say you're going to be, but you, in a good scheme, you are a productive tight end. And we see that all over the place. I mean, some of the biggest tight ends right now, we see where they got drafted, and it just is what it is. And so I'm watching the film, and again, you got pluses. You can have plus ball skills. You can have plus blocking. You can have, different things that would separate you to a higher level of prospect. But at the end of the day, tight ends are they're very plug and play, I guess is the best way to say it. Much like running backs, much like receivers. I think running backs is the highest extent, and that's why I don't evaluate them. But tight ends, it goes by quick, because I'm just like, this year, I'm just like, shoot, like as long as they get into a good scheme, they're going to be fine. Because again, number one, you're already a mismatch. You get on the field, you're a mismatch. You don't have to be super fast or anything. You like, just because your body composition and the matchups you'll go against, you're going to be a mismatch against somebody. And so that doesn't mean you're going to win the match every time, but you already got a sort of advantage. The second thing is, it's all dictated on like the play. And I know that sounds simple, but so many people argue with me about receivers, and it drives me crazy when they're like, this receiver sucks or this player sucks. I'm like, how do they suck? And it's usually just because they don't have big stats. I tell you a specific example. Me and my friend argued so much about Kyle Pitts. He said Kyle Pitts sucks. I'm like, how does Kyle Pitts suck? Again, the average tight end can be productive in the NFL and effective. This guy has double plus athleticism. And then you could even talk about football character and all that stuff. I'm like, there's no way in any reality that Kyle Pitts sucks. and he says, look at his numbers. So for me, number one, he put up crazy numbers his rookie year, so that argument's already out the window. But number two, if you're like, okay, he fell off, you're trying to tell me he fell off a cliff, he don't know how to play football, he's not good at football, then I need to see that you have a similar amount of opportunity, targets. Now, that's one thing. If you said, hey, he's got the same roughly amount of targets and his numbers fell off a cliff, then we can have a conversation. And then even still, you got to talk about quality of targets, because not every target is created equal. And so this guy went from Matt Ryan to Desmond Ridder. And let's just say, because we know what happened in real life, but let's just say the scheme was similar and Desmond Ridder threw the ball to Kyle Pitts just as much as Matt Ryan. Do you think a Kyle or a Matt Ryan pass is equal to a Desmond Ridder pass? You think those the same quality? But even ignoring that part, just the targets alone, the opportunity, you got to show me this guy's getting a bunch of opportunity and his numbers fell off. Otherwise, that's not a commentary on his ability, because they're not throwing him the ball. And then you get guys that'll be like Brock Bowers with the Raiders. Look what he did. They force-fed Brock Bowers. Again, look at his targets. And again, that's not taken away from him, not saying he's not good, but look at the amount of opportunities he's got. They made sure to go to him. The Raiders were one of the worst rushing teams in the league. That is very different than the Falcons, who were one of the top 3 rushing teams and didn't throw the ball a lot. And when they did, couldn't throw it to Pitts. And so the example I use is, if you look at a play, a receiver, tight end, whoever, executes their route perfectly, does their job, everything perfectly, the scheme gets them open, and the quarterback misses the pass, overthrows it, underthrows it, whatever, can't be caught. What's the difference in between that receiver on that play and if the quarterback put it right in his hands and he scored a touchdown? On one hand, you got an explosive play, touchdown. The other hand, you got an incompletion. What's the difference in the receiver? Absolutely nothing. Because there's an incompletion, now that receiver sucks? What are we talking about? And that idea is what just annoys me when I hear these conversations about receiving targets or like tight ends, receivers, and people talking about how bad they are. That's not a commentary on them. Now, if it went perfectly to them and they dropped it, that's a different conversation. Then you can have a conversation about them. Similarly, same thing. If we had that same thing happen, except the coverage covered up that receiver and another receiver was open on that play and they got the big play, what does that say about the receiver that didn't get the ball? Nothing. It's not like, oh, he sucks, he didn't get the ball. No. We ran a play, it was cover whatever, so this is open against that versus my route. That doesn't mean I'm bad. What are we talking about? And so it's just like, again, football is a team sport, it's interdependent. And so I look at it like, especially with tight ends, they're very scheme versatile. In today's NFL, there's not many teams that don't use tight ends similarly. I watch because there's slightly different flavors that might be slightly better with certain schemes, but for the most part, you can move them around. And for people that don't agree, look, if Travis Kelce was out for a year and Noah Gray got all his snaps, you mean to tell me he wouldn't put up better numbers than Kyle Pitts with Desmond Ridder? Just think about it. Desmond Ridder, Kyle Pitts. We could look up the numbers. I don't got them, but we could look them up. You mean to tell me if Kelsey was out for a year or if he was gone and Noah Gray stepped in, he couldn't put up better numbers or similar numbers? He absolutely could. Does that mean Noah Gray is better than Kyle Pitts? No, it doesn't. It's the opportunity and the team you are playing with. Kittle can go to the Chiefs and ball out, and vice versa. Kittle can go to the Packers. He can go to the Commanders. He could go to the Bears, whatever. And those are the top tier tight ends. I'm using the extreme example, but you get my point. Like, again, there's certain flavors that might fit a scheme better, but for the most part, in this league, tight ends can play wherever they got to play. And same like a Dalton Schultz. Dalton Schultz did pretty decent with the Cowboys, went to the Texans. There's other guys getting more targets than him, but when he get his targets, he still plays pretty decent. Jake Ferguson, low round pick, I believe at Ohio State. I want to say it was Ohio State. Stepped in for Schultz, doing pretty well. So, like, and I get it's the same thing with the running backs and receivers. People don't want to, for whatever reason, they don't want to agree to this, but it's the truth. I'm not saying that the people aren't talented, but it's just the nature of the game, especially in tight end where the coverage dictates, man. You play action over the middle, wide open, boom. You run an RPO, a little play action pop, boom. You get into a mismatch with a safety, boom. Like, that's the game. Like, yes, there are moments where one-on-one situations you got to win. And yes, that's what makes, again, some of those guys that are above and that are more special. But for the most part, when you look at what makes somebody effective at the position, the bar is very low for tight end. And so that's why I felt this year I kind of sped through it more. Like, you kind of know what they are and you kind of go. Because where they go is going to matter more than just their straight up skill set, to be honest with you. I mean, because you could have, like Brock Bowers, again, I keep using this example, put him on that Desmond Ridder Falcons. Obviously, Art Smith was not into the idea of forcing the ball to the tight end. So Brock Bowers, out of sheer talent, wasn't going to put up numbers if they weren't going to give him the ball. He went to a place where they did decide to do that. That's the biggest difference with running backs and tight ends, and to a certain extent receivers. Receivers are a little different because you play out on the perimeter where it's a little harder. So that's one big takeaway. And there's a lot of things else I could say, but I've been talking for a while, but that's just, that's a very general overview of the draft process for me. I didn't even get into a lot of different things that I said, some of my philosophies, but all I'll say is really tough for people, whether it's media, whether it's fans or whatever, because I think people get real lost in this idea of, like, either trying to project a player's career, which is insane when you don't know where they're going. But then they also, I think, get a little too lost in this idea of what they do in college versus how they do it. And that's why I say all the time, it's not what you do, it's how you do it. And so in this type of world of evaluation, the player, it might not be a big play, it might not even be a good play, but a player could still provide some good quality information or have a quality rep, even if they might not have completed the pass or they might not have caught the pass or whatever. There's more information that goes into it. And I think that's one of the hardest parts for people is like, and as I said earlier, the stats don't really translate to the NFL. And so you see people making big plays, and it's easy to be like, oh yeah, he's gonna do that in the league. And the league is not it's not college. It's not college at all. I think we know by now there's plenty of big time college players that just couldn't make it in the league. And so I think that's the hardest thing for people to see, is to watch a player and separate what they're doing from the results. Because when you just look at the results, it's a inaccurate translation to the NFL. It's not like about the result. It's like how you went about it and how you did it. Because then I can say, yeah, you're not going to get away with that in the NFL. You're not going to be able to do that in the NFL. Or that is something that's hard to defend or stop in the NFL. Whatever the case may be. And I think that's one of the hardest things. And so, again, you got to really know your purpose in doing it. And that helps focus the evaluation. And for me, it's all about, again, grading those gradable skills. And over the years, just refining what skills actually matter and translate to the league. So, yeah, but I'm gonna stop there. There's probably a lot more I can say, but go down in the comment section. Let me know what you think. Definitely let me know if you got any questions. Again, lots of years doing this. Share it around, get the conversation started. Thumbs up, subscribe, and thank you for listening.